It's time for today's AM Minnesota program, and we are going to be talking about the commercial storage, the elevators. Bob Zelenka is the executive director of the Minnesota Grain and Feed Association. And Bob, always enjoy visiting with you from time to time.
Always a pleasure, Jerry.
Well, of course, you represent the organizations of basically all those country elevators out there, right?
Yeah, we're the Minnesota Grain and Feed Association, been around since 1907, representing country elevators and feed mills around the state of Minnesota. We've got now we probably have about 350 companies operating about 600 locations around the state of Minnesota.
Boy, that's a lot of locations.
Sure is. We're in a lot of small towns around the state. Used to be in even more as time's gone on. Our industry is, as you know, and your listeners know, our industry has consolidated quite a bit over the last especially the last 15, 20 years, but it's still a predominant player, biggest taxpayer in a lot of communities, major employer in a lot of towns. So we still have a role to play, major market or the market for growers, and of course we sell a lot of inputs in the spring as well.
I think that's the key, diversification with not just an elevator, but retailers too with a lot of the inputs, because the commercial side, the grain business, has changed over the years with the ethanol plants, and then also a lot of farmers now have semis, and they're kind of skipping those country elevators sometimes and going right to the terminals themselves.
Well, exactly, and that's just going to continue. So, yeah, what you've seen in terms of the mergers and consolidations, there's a lot of grain and feed companies that were strictly grain and feed are now in agronomy, and you're seeing that trend continuing. It's probably a good thing to have that diversity and be able to provide that diversity to your customer base.
I think that diversity really helped some of them survive.
Yeah, it sure has. Some of these, some years it's kind of lean, or just a lot of reasons why. And I can think back in the mid '80s, coming out of the farm crisis, and the CRP came into being. Ethanol plants started to expand, and it really put a lot of pressure on grain elevators at that point. And I think the trend started back then in terms of thinking about you can't put all your eggs in one basket or all your grain in one bin, kind of thing. So it's been interesting to see the evolution of our industry. There's still solid industry, just fewer players or fewer but larger facilities out there.
Yeah, the ethanol industry really changed it too, but then the commercial elevators kind of picked up the slack too, because there's not a lot of storage at those ethanol plants, so a lot of farmers then started to use some of that commercial storage until they had to deliver the corn to an ethanol plant.
Yeah, it was initially I think farmers were trying to haul direct, maybe bypassing the country elevator, if you will, but it's developed into a decent market both for farmers and for grain elevators in a lot of instances. There's like 400 million bushels of corn a year, I think, go to ethanol here in Minnesota. So that's certainly a good option for us.
The real key, it always seems to be, and the emphasis is on having rail transportation. But yet, Bob, I know of a lot of rural country elevators that aren't on a rail line, and they still seem to be doing well.
Yeah, a lot of them still have their niche. They have their loyal customer base. They're able to find those small markets, whether it's an ethanol plant, local processor, or wherever the case might be, or local feed use for that matter. So they've been able to hold their own. A lot of pressure, though. I think when we talk about mergers and consolidations, can't overlook the impact transportation has had on that. Out of 150 rail users in the state of Minnesota, about 50 of those are those large unit train loading facilities now that we have here in Minnesota. And so that's even put pressure even on the elevators that have rail yet, but haven't been able to spend that $25 million to build that shuttle facility. So it's a constantly changing industry, that's for sure. But again, those that are surviving are, they have customer service. They've got a lot of things going for them. Again, the customer base that's been pretty loyal and so on.
And then help farmers with marketing plans.
Yeah, exactly. There's just a multiple of things that we've been able to provide in terms of information, education, as well as the basics, picking up on the farm, the grain drying we provide, the inputs we sell. I mean, the whole picture.
In addition to having a coffee pot on.
In addition to that, exactly.
Yeah, because those local elevators, ever since I was growing up, it was kind of a social spot where you went once in a while too.
Oh yeah, exactly. And I don't think you see much beer around there anymore. But
No.
certainly, the coffee pot's always on, soft drinks, little candy bars, all those kind of things. But it always has been a networking tool, if you will. People coming to town. It's the reason why a lot of people come to town. So I think it's an economic driver, has been for many years, these grain elevators in and around the state.
Bob Stanley. My guest on the program today is Bob Zelenka, who's the Executive Director of the Minnesota Grain and Feed Association. Bob, just before the market break, we were talking a bit about a lot of those rural country elevators are kind of social spots too. Well, I'll tell you, some of these new ones, these shuttle loadings, whatever fancy term you call them, guys don't even get out of their trucks anymore.
Yeah, I know it. It's kind of the unfortunate part on the networking portion of that. You're kind of missing out a little bit. Yeah, they can come in and be gone in probably 5 minutes and don't have to get out of the truck. They've just got a little card reader and everything's kind of done electronically. So efficiency is important for us to handle the kind of bushels we need to handle at some of these facilities. But it's kind of unfortunate it'd be at the expense of that networking. A part of the reason why you go through an elevator, but it's been a good move, and the efficient farmers appreciate that kind of efficiency.
Well, we are going to tax the entire system with the yields that I'm hearing in our listening area, at least the majority of our listening area this fall.
Oh boy, yeah, that the soybean harvest has been moving at a pretty fast clip. I've been hearing reports of 40s, 50s, 60s, but it's pretty common, mid-60s to 71 bushels to the acre on soybeans. I mean, that's a pretty good yield, and it's putting some pressure on the elevators. Some have got pretty slammed, I would think, over the last 3, 4, 5 days, and even using some of their designated corn bins for soybeans, and even putting some soybeans on the ground, unfortunately, or at least in temporary bunkers where you can at least cover it and keep it out of the elements. But that's hopefully you can move those beans. You don't want to put beans on the ground if you don't have to.
I've never seen beans stored out, maybe even in a bunker I haven't noticed it, but if you had a tarp on them so you could keep the rain off, maybe get them moved out in a month or two, you'd probably be all right, wouldn't you?
Yeah, generally those bunkers typically have aeration below and above. They have tarp covering, hard surface, sidewalls, and typically you can, if it's short-term storage, and that's what you want to do when you're using bunkers as short-term anyway, is usually the quality can be managed pretty well. But again, with the value of soybeans versus corn, you'd rather be putting corn in those bunkers than soybeans. And I think some of that's probably going to be temporary. In fact, I know some elevators that moved out some of that old crop corn that they're still sitting on and moved that out to clear out a corn bin, put that in a bunker so they have room for new crop soybeans. So a lot of jostling going around, a lot of movement going on, but hopefully we can handle it. It's a good problem to have, though.
Corn, when it's just an outside pile, that haven't, I guess, seen that for the last couple years, but I've seen it many years in the past. If it rains, the rain just kind of goes right down to the bottom. But beans, wouldn't they just swell up on top and germinate? I guess I don't have any thought, but it would be ugly maybe if you got a bunch of rain.
Yeah, it could, yeah. You'd want to get a cover on that as soon as possible, that's for sure. And, in terms of how that would affect the quality of the soybean, hard to say at this point. The corn's a little bit bigger kernels. I don't know if soybeans would pack tighter, if that would create more of a problem. You do have concerns with corn. A lot of times at the bottom of the pile, you could probably get a little moisture accumulation and some mold. But typically, if you got it covered in time and it can prevent a lot of that moisture seepage, you can probably do okay on the quality. So I guess hopefully, like I said earlier, hopefully we don't have to sit on these beans very long.
I can't remember exactly the last time you and I talked. Later on last summer, and there was kind of a mad rush. Farmers were emptying a lot of bins, bringing them that corn to the elevator, and then the elevators were trying to get it moved out to make room for new crop. Did we end up with a lot of old crop corn in Minnesota yet?
Yeah, we unfortunately did. Yeah, there was a lot of movement in the summer into August and early September. Try to move some crop, move some space. Farmers wanted to clear out the farm storage to make some room for new crop. Whether I'm not sure farmers really needed maybe that much money. I'm not sure what the reason was. Markets were a little flat. Prices, as we know, weren't very good. But we ended up, in some cases, some elevators having 10, 15% of their storage still clogged with old crop corn. That didn't help matters when we're looking at today some elevators having to shut off accepting soybeans because they just don't have any space left. So it's a problem. We're hopeful we can get this stuff moving. There's some contracts, I know, to move some of this stuff into the marketplace here over the next few months. But right now we're looking at a tough situation storage-wise.
Well, down my way, all the elevators around were full, and I had some beans sold for fall delivery because I don't have room to store them all on my farm. And the elevator said, we can't take them right now.
Yeah, in fact, in some cases, I think they would probably cater to you before they would cater to somebody just driving in off the farm, if you will. So I think they almost have to get into a prioritization kind of situation in that kind of deal.
Well, that's exactly what happened. I was going to fill my bin at home first and hope things opened up later. I called them back the next day, and they'd gotten some hauled out, and that's what they did. They prioritized those that were sold for fall delivery. Another farmer that had extra bushels because of the big yield, well, he had to go somewhere else to try and find another spot for him.
Yep, yeah, it's not unusual to see that to happen, and it's you have to honor your commitments as best you can. So, yeah, it's been a challenge trying to deal with the onslaught that we've seen. We could have probably used a day or two of rain in there to kind of slow things down just a little bit. But
be careful what you wish for, Bob.
Yep, I hear you.
Well, and then I called another elevator that I hadn't done business with for probably 20 years or more, just to see if he would had space. And he said, well, he was calling all his customers to see how much they needed because he was going to take care of his customers first, and can't fault him for that.
Yeah, no, I can't at all. No, it's a challenge for us, and I think there's hopefully we can manage this, and I think we will. But it's just short term. It's going to be kind of a struggle for us, but we'll find the space and we'll handle the grain and we'll move it into the marketplace as best we can. I know guys are working on it pretty aggressively at this point, trying to find those markets and get this stuff moving.
And I was talking to my elevator manager, and some beans that were hauling to Fairmont. There's another branch, a big new shuttle elevator that they had been taking some to them, part of their company, but that got full. And then they were talking about going to Mankato and having to wait in line 4 or 5 hours. So that's pretty slow going.
Yeah, it really is. I know the processors have been pretty backed up. Ethanol plants have been pretty full. I mean, there's just your options are limited right here in the short term, that's for sure. But it's going to shake free. I'm pretty confident of that. Just a matter of time, and hopefully people will be patient. And with the added space we've got, both commercial and on-farm, that's certainly going to be all full, I think, this fall, that's for sure.
Boy, just think if these last few years we wouldn't have seen all this on-farm storage built. In addition to the commercial elevators, boy, a lot of those have added some humongous bins.
Oh, they have. Both ways, they've added a lot of storage. In Minnesota, the total storage capacity in Minnesota, over 75% of it is actually located on the farm, and so you've seen substantial growth of on-farm storage, and you need some of that, no question about it. So, with all of that, it's going to be pretty full year, I think, both in southern Minnesota, and then you look up in the valley into the wheat harvest. That also was very good this fall. Very good return, very good yields, and again, it's statewide. I think we've been sitting pretty good on some pretty good crop.
What's the situation with the rail transportation here? What was it last winter, even last fall? It was so backed up because they could make a whole lot more money hauling crude.
Yeah, that was the winter of 13 and 14. We don't want to relive that again. We lost a lot of money with inability to honor contracts on our side to deliver to end users, and the cost of freight skyrocketed and so forth, and just availability was a problem. But that was, of course, related a lot to the oil coming out of the Bakken. The coal industry was moving a lot of coal and exporting coal. All of that has come down. Less oil moving by rail, less coal being moved. Of course, as we know, less grain being moved as well. So as a result, rail service really hasn't been a problem. And hopefully, they've spent a lot of money, give them credit. Railroads have spent a lot of money in infrastructure improvements over the last year or so since then as well. So all of that combined with less demand has freed up some space, fortunately. So when the time comes to move this grain, the prices improve and so on, and we should be in pretty good shape. Certainly nothing like we experienced back then.
Well, a lot of the elevators, farmers like me have forward sold grain for fall delivery. Well, they in turn make arrangements to have that transported, and they resell it again. So hopefully the rail transportation is there this fall, because that could open up some space in an elevator real fast if a 50 or 100 car unit train showed up.
Well, exactly. Yeah, you're right, because you're looking at unit train, that's 400,000 bushels just in one train. So the more trains and the more markets that open up, the more space is going to open up as well. So depending on this corn crop and how soon that comes out, it sounds like it's been fairly drying pretty well in the field, and so who knows how long that's going to last to draw this out a little bit. But give us some time maybe to catch up with our space needs at some of these facilities.
Because really, when you think about it, rail cars are almost a form of storage too in the fall. If they've went through the elevator, now it's on the rail somewhere.
Yeah, rail or the barge. In some cases, that takes a little longer to get down to New Orleans, and so yeah, there's ways, I guess, to utilize those in a little bit like that. But yeah, it's going to be interesting fall, no doubt.
Some of the farmers that I know, they don't have enough acres that they can justify semis, but yet they're working with their local elevator that isn't in rail transportation either. But you briefly mentioned before the market break too about on-farm pickup. So the elevator has semis, comes right out to the farm, picks it up, and maybe takes it to the river.
Yeah, we've that's pretty common practice. We've seen that often, and that's kind of those services we try to provide to try to be as competitive as we can. And the whole environment has changed over the last 20 years with a lot of producers. I know not all, but certainly a lot of producers do have those semis. But those that do not, we're able and willing to work with them and provide them the kind of a similar service, if you will.
Yeah, because I know some of these guys, smaller trucks and wagons to the local elevator, and it's trucked out, or the elevator would just go right out to the farm and pick it up. So it's really handy.
Oh yeah, it's a nice service to be able to provide that.
We should probably talk a little bit about the bonding and how elevators are insured for farmers' financial protection. That's a big buzzword in agriculture today. What is it called? Third-party risk.
Mm-hmm. In Minnesota, any grain buyer has to be bonded, and in order to, before you can get licensed, you have to be able to get a bond, whether it's to store grain or to buy grain. And in Minnesota, the bond is available for buying, for storing. Bonds do not cover, though, extensions of credit. So if you have a contract, the way you're protected there is the state law requires all grain buyers to have 90% of their outstanding contract obligations covered in-house in terms of grain on hand, cash on hand, other obligations such as that. So that's what exists in Minnesota. It's worked pretty well for many, many years. Hopefully it will continue to work well. But, I think there's protections there, and the Department of Ag is, the responsible party to make sure that facilities, grain buyers are on the up and up, have the bonding required, and are adhering to state law through examinations that they provide on an annual basis.
Oh, when I was a dairy farmer, I always had the Minnesota Department of Agriculture's state inspector. I knew every 6 months he had to be there. Sometimes it was closer to 4. Well, those inspectors actually show up in an elevator too, and won't they actually climb the bends and make sure that the corn or beans that are supposed to be there is there?
Right, yeah, there's 2 examinations at a minimum per year per grain buyer or grain facility. And yes, what they're doing is they'll do a measure up to compare what you've got in store to what you have on the books. So they're doing a pretty intense analysis of these facilities and looking at the contracts and the outstanding contracts. They look at the warehouse receipts and make sure those are accurate and all those kind of things. So there's safeguards in place, and I think it's worked out pretty well for us in terms of protecting the producers here in the state.
When it does happen that an elevator gets in financial difficulty, it's big news. That means that's maybe a good thing in that it's so rare.
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, it does happen. It's not to say it can't happen, but we've been fortunate, and I think that it says a lot about our system here, the bonding system, the Department of Ag, and the inspector system that they have, the work that they do to ensure the integrity of our industry, and that's very important for all of us.
But there is a way that a farmer can get in trouble, and I sometimes take this chance too. I've got some beans sold for fall delivery, but I don't want to take the money until January. There you are what's called an unsecured creditor, where if the elevator got in financial difficulty, you might be at loss there?
I believe you may be right on that one in terms of being an unsecured creditor in that situation. Although I guess I'm not 100% as to whether you would be on preferred or a preferred creditor. But yeah, can be a risky venture in that case.
So in other words, if you're wondering, maybe I should talk to a lawyer too just to make sure. But I've always heard that, whereas if you have it stored there, or you have, a warehouse receipt, then you have all the protections.
You're definitely a preferred creditor in those kind of situations, so that the bond proceeds or the sale of grain that is frozen by the state and resold, that stuff would go to the preferred creditors, and in those situations, buying and or storing, you are a preferred creditor, so guaranteed there.
It sure looks like your industry is going to have a good year, though. Nothing to be worse than harvest done and you have a bunch of empty bins. Bins clogged with grain is a good thing for your industry.
Oh yeah, it's a good thing. You don't want to have spend $1 million on some new bins and not use them. So I think we're going to be pretty good shape this year and using what we've got. And it's been a good move for us to add what we've done, and on the farm as well. I think again the added storage we've seen over the last 2 years, it's been a good thing, particularly when you look at the size of the crop we're facing right now.
Yeah, even with low prices, if you have a whole bunch more bushels to sell, that eases the pain. So even though I have a low price, if I've got a few thousand more bushels of corn or beans stored at the elevator, well, that's good for them, and it's still good for me too.
Oh, right. And of course, the important thing there is having a good marketing plan in place to know when to sell, and maybe instead of holding off for that $7 corn, maybe sell a little bit here, a little bit there, and try to come up with a good plan. I know taxes come into play and other things like that, but that's where, as we talked about earlier, we've got folks at the elevators that happy to work with producers and trying to come up with a good plan for selling those grains into the marketplace.
Wanted to spend just a couple minutes talking about Farm America too. Bob, you're the chairman of the board there. Before we move to Farm America, anything else that we should mention on your real job as executive director of the Grain and Feed Association in Minnesota?
No, I don't think so. I just encourage the producers to be patient with us. We're doing the best we can. We're required to check on the existence of liens when people are selling grain, and that takes time. So there's a lot to what we got to do to make sure that we're following all the procedures required. But just be patient with us, and we'll try to work through this glut of grain that we're envisioning right now.
Well, let's move over to Farm America. Sounds like they've had some successful things in a busy summer.
Yeah, it's been a busy summer. I'm currently chairman of the board, and we've got a new executive director in Roger Steinkamp. We hired him just about a year ago now, so he's got about a year under his belt. And we had some pretty good events at the fall fair and summer events, a spring event. And our biggest thing right now is school tours. We do a lot of school tours in the spring and the fall. That's probably the biggest thing. And coming up, we've got a haunted corn maze and haunted feed mill and corn maze, October 16th and 17th, and again October 23rd and 24th. That's always been a good event, really fun event. In fact, our corn maze a few years ago was the WCCO corn maze of the state, kind of the number one corn maze in the state. So we got a lot of pride in that. But I'd encourage people to go to www.farmamerica.com to learn more about what's going. farmamerica.org. farmamerica.org to learn more about what's going on there. But it's the Ag Interpretive Center for the state of Minnesota, established by the legislature. So, that's our job is to tell the story of agriculture, and we encourage people to stop out and visit us when they got some time.
And if you want to get involved as a volunteer, make a contribution, they're all welcome.
They're all welcome. We need volunteers and we need contributions. So I do appreciate the support of Jerry, and I know you've been a very strong supporter of Farm America, and we do certainly appreciate that.
Well, Bob, we're out of time. Always good talking to you.
Always a pleasure, Jerry. Thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you again soon.
My guest on today's AM Minnesota program was Bob Zelenka, who's the Executive Director of the Minnesota Grain and Feed Association.